My phone buzzed at 6:43 in the morning. I wiped my eyes, thinking maybe it was a reminder or a weather alert. But no. It was a message from my only son. "You stole my money." Just that. No good morning, Mom. No explanation. I sat there in my nightgown, staring at the screen like it was written in another language. Stole? From him? I had signed over everything, the savings, the house, even access to my account because I trusted him. I used to call him my miracle. Christopher came into this world on a rainy Thursday morning, when I was barely 23 and barely hanging on. My husband, Harold, and I were living in a tiny apartment above a bakery, trying to make ends meet. We didn't have much, but we had enough. He worked long days fixing tractors at the feed store, and I stitched uniforms for the school district from home. We'd laugh late into the night, even if it was over canned soup and stale bread. When Chris was born, Harold cried. I didn't know a man's hands that rough could tremble like that. He held our son like he was holding the whole world. We were good parents. Not perfect, Lord knows we had our moments, but good. We read to him every night. We played cards together after dinner. We spent weekends walking down to the park, chasing ducks and wiping sticky fingers after ice cream. There wasn't much money, but there was always love. Then when Chris turned 7, Harold got sick. Cancer doesn't wait for the right time. Just takes. He was gone within 8 months. The night he passed, Chris crawled into bed beside me, curled into my side and whispered, "Don't cry, Mommy. I'll take care of you." And for a while it felt like he meant it. Raising a boy alone isn't easy, especially when your heart is still broken. But I did it. I took on 2 jobs, cleaning classrooms during the day, and working as a receptionist at a mechanic's shop in the evening. Every penny I made went to keeping us afloat and giving Chris what he needed. He never went without school shoes or lunch money. I made sure of that. And he was such a good boy. Smart, kind, thoughtful. He used to bring me flowers from the schoolyard, dandelions and clovers wrapped in a napkin. I kept every single one pressed in an old Bible. When he got older, he started working part-time at the grocery store after school. I told him he didn't have to, but he insisted. "You've done enough, Mom," he'd say. "Let me help now." I remember the day he got into college, a local one not far from home. He came running through the front door with the letter in hand, shouting, "I did it." I cried so hard I couldn't even read the paper. He stayed at home through school to save money. We shared the same kitchen table, now cluttered with his textbooks and my coupon books. I cooked dinner every night. Pot roast on Sundays, his favorite spaghetti on Wednesdays. He graduated with a degree in finance and I was so proud I thought my heart might burst. When he got his first real job at a regional bank, he bought me a new coat, navy blue wool with gold buttons. "You're not going to any more church events in that old thing," he teased. We laughed about it all evening. I trusted him completely. That's what hurts the most now. Not just the betrayal, but how easy I made it for him to do it. A few years ago, after a minor surgery, I had trouble getting to the bank. He offered to help me with my bills while I recovered. "You should just add me to your account, Mom," he said. "It'll be easier for both of us." And it was at first. He paid the electric bill, ordered my prescriptions, even handled the house insurance renewal. It felt like we were partners, like that little boy who once promised to take care of me was keeping his word. Then he got married. Her name was Emily. Pretty sharp in more ways than one. She smiled at me when she had to. But there was always a sense of calculation behind her eyes, like she was measuring me up. First I thought I was being paranoid. She was always polite but never warm. When they moved into that new house, a big one, too big if you ask me, Chris said they were going to be managing their finances more independently now. I nodded and smiled, not realizing at the time what that meant. We still had Sunday dinners, though they became less frequent. He'd come alone sometimes, saying Emily was tied up or not feeling well. I'd send leftovers anyway, wrapped in foil with little notes. "Hope you feel better soon." But something had shifted. There were small things at first. He'd make comments about how expensive groceries had become, or joke that retirement must be nice. Once I caught him glancing at my checkbook when I stepped into the kitchen to grab dessert. Still, I never thought much of it. I reminded myself that he was busy, tired, adjusting to married life. I had been through that too. I told myself not to overthink things. But deep down I knew something was changing. I kept giving because that's what mothers do. I gave when they needed help with a down payment. I gave when they wanted to refinance the car. I gave when Emily accidentally overdrew her card buying new furniture. Every time it was just temporary. Just until the next paycheck. Just a little help. I didn't realize how quickly just a little help can become an expectation. I thought I was being generous. I didn't see I was being used. It started with a laugh. One evening during dinner at their house, a modern chilly place with spotless white counters and not a picture in sight, I made a comment about how expensive my water heater replacement had been. Just in passing. Something like, "They sure don't make them like they used to." Emily chuckled and without looking up from her plate said, "Well, maybe next time we'll just take your card and save ourselves the explanation." Chris laughed too. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. I smiled politely, but something inside me winced. They changed the subject immediately, but I didn't. Not in my mind. That night, lying in bed, I replayed that sentence over and over. "We'll just take your card." Like it was nothing. Like I was a bank with a slow voice and thinning hair. I brushed it off. Told myself I was too sensitive. Emily had always been a bit dry, I reasoned. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe I was just tired. But after that night, I started noticing more. Chris stopped calling just to check in. Our conversations became transactional, bills, deadlines. "Just following up on that check you said you'd write." It was subtle but unmistakable. There was no warmth in his voice anymore. Just expectation. When I hesitated once, saying I'd like to look at the statement before transferring money to cover a missed mortgage fee, he sighed and said, "You're not making this easy, Mom." I wanted to scream. Not making it easy. I remembered holding his hand through his first broken arm, cleaning vomit off his bedsheets when he had the flu, scraping together coins from the couch cushions to pay for his field trip. And now I was the one not making things easy. That's when I started watching. Quietly, without saying a word. I asked the bank to begin mailing paper statements again, rather than letting Chris handle everything online. The teller, a kind girl named Rachel, gave me a strange look. "I thought your son had all this linked already?" "He does," I replied with a smile. "But I'd like to see them myself now." That decision opened a floodgate. Within 2 weeks, I noticed odd withdrawals. Not large, but frequent. $30 here, $50 there. Grocery stores across town I'd never been to. Online payments labeled home improvement and interior design. A $400 purchase at a boutique I didn't recognize. At first, I wanted to believe it was a mistake. Some kind of crossed wire or mislabeling. I even called Chris. "Do you know what this Orchid Lane interiors charge is?" I asked gently. He paused. "Oh, that? That was a joint purchase. You said we could use the account for home things." "No," I said slowly. "I said I'd help with the down payment. Not furniture." He scoffed. "You know what, Mom? If you're going to nitpick every little thing, maybe we need to rethink this whole setup." And just like that, the conversation ended. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just irritation, like I was inconveniencing him by noticing. After that call, I started keeping notes. A little spiral-bound notebook tucked into the drawer beside my chair. Every transaction I didn't recognize, I wrote down. The date. The amount. A guess at who it was really for. It filled up quicker than I expected. What pained me most wasn't the money, not really. It was the slow unraveling of trust. Every entry felt like a tiny betrayal. A small reminder that my son, the boy who once kissed my forehead goodnight, was quietly taking pieces of me without asking. Even Emily changed. She no longer made small talk. When I visited, she was either glued to her phone or out running errands. Once, she left halfway through dinner to go to a last-minute yoga class, leaving me and Chris alone in silence. I tried to joke. "She's always busy." Chris didn't smile. He just muttered, "She's under a lot of pressure." You wouldn't understand. That word you stung. As if I'd never known pressure. As if working 2 jobs, raising him alone, and skipping meals so he could eat was nothing. Worse still, I began to notice how they spoke about the future. When we finally renovate the upstairs, or, once we move out of this place, we'll have so much more room for entertaining. They'd talk about properties, upgrades, vacations, all with a confidence that confused me. Where was this money coming from? One night, over tea with my friend Louise, I confessed my growing discomfort. I don't want to sound bitter, I said, stirring my spoon too long, but I think they see me as a resource, not a person. Louise looked at me sadly. You're not bitter, Marjorie. You're waking up. That stuck with me. Waking up. I started moving slower when I was around them, not out of age but out of caution. I watched their expressions when I spoke. I tested small comments like leaving the water heater repair unpaid for a few days. Chris called irritated, saying it reflects badly on me when stuff like that isn't handled. Me. Not us. Not you need anything, Mom. But me. I realized then. This wasn't just distance. It wasn't fatigue or growing pains. It was entitlement. Chris had begun to believe that everything I owned would eventually be his, so what difference did it make if he took some now? But he was wrong. Because I was still here. And I was beginning to see things clearly for the first time in a long, long while. The moment it happened, I knew there was no going back. It was a Sunday afternoon. One of those chilly spring days when the sun shows up but doesn't do much warming. Emily had invited a few people over for a housewarming party. They'd finished remodeling the kitchen and were eager to show off their new modern farmhouse aesthetic, as she called it. I almost didn't go. I'd been feeling a bit under the weather, and honestly I was tired of pretending everything was fine. But a part of me, maybe the stubborn mother in me, still clung to the hope that if I kept showing up they'd see me again. Not as a burden, not as a bank, but as Mom. The moment I walked in I could tell something was off. The air felt tight, polished. The kind of atmosphere where laughter has to be staged. There were wine glasses on the counter, finger foods I couldn't pronounce and guests I didn't recognize, co-workers, old college friends, people who looked past me like I was the help. Emily came over, all smiles and lipstick. "Oh good, you made it," she said, patting my shoulder like I was a pet. Then she turned and vanished into a group of women discussing a designer who sold authentic vintage brass faucets for $900. Chris didn't even look up from the grill. So I did what I always did. Smiled, found a quiet seat, and tried not to be in the way. That's when I heard it. I had gone to the hallway to hang up my coat. The door was slightly ajar to what I realized was their office. Chris was inside, talking to a man in a blazer. I paused. Not to eavesdrop, not at first. Just long enough to hear my own name. "She won't know the difference," Chris said. The man chuckled. "And if she does?" Chris sighed. "She's already signed over power of attorney for the house. It's just a matter of time. The plan is to sell after we move. Her place has appreciated more than ours." My hand tightened on the coat hanger. The man asked something else low enough I couldn't hear. Chris answered, "If she gives us any trouble, Emily already talked to a social worker about memory decline. We've got options." My ears rang. I stepped back slowly, coat still in my hand. I didn't want to make a sound. I didn't want to be caught listening, not because I was afraid but because I didn't want him to see the look on my face. Shock. Hurt. Rage. I walked outside without saying goodbye. No one noticed. Not my son. Not his wife. Not any of their guests. I slipped away like a forgotten dishcloth, invisible among polished granite countertops and curated flower arrangements. I didn't cry on the way home. I didn't scream or throw anything. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, turned on the kettle, and stared at the steam rising like ghosts from the past. Sell my house? Fake memory decline? This was beyond a bad joke. Beyond carelessness. This was a betrayal so deep, it cracked something inside me. The next morning I took out my birth certificate, the house deed, and the original power of attorney paperwork. I spread them across my kitchen table like a war map. I read every word. Slowly. Carefully. And then I made a call. It was to a lawyer. A woman named Esther Friedman. I'd met her years ago through a church friend. She was sharp, older, and when I told her everything she didn't blink. "This isn't unusual," she said. "But it's still painful." We met the next day. She read the documents, made notes, and looked me straight in the eye. "You're not losing your mind, Mrs. Lockhart. But you are losing your control. And we need to take it back." Over the following days I began to withdraw, not just emotionally but financially. I changed my online banking passwords. I requested paper-only statements. I visited the credit bureau and put alerts on my identity. I asked for a full report of all recent inquiries. What I saw turned my stomach. 3 attempts to open credit cards in my name. 1 inquiry for a reverse mortgage. A recent appraisal request on my property. They were planning something bigger than I'd realized. And they weren't waiting for me to die. They were trying to take it while I was still here, still breathing. At church the following Sunday, I stayed late after service. I couldn't pray properly. I just sat in the back pew staring at the stained glass. The colors danced across the floor like fragments of truth. That's when Sister Helen came and sat beside me. She'd known me for over 20 years. "Something's weighing on you," she said gently. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. Her eyes softened and she reached for my hand. "You've always been the one holding your family together. But it's okay to protect yourself now. Even Jesus flipped tables when the temple was being misused." That line stayed with me. Even Jesus flipped tables. And so would I, but not with rage. With precision. With quiet dignity. A few days later, I attended a family dinner at Chris's house. I hadn't been invited, I asked to come. I needed to see them face to face one more time before the tide turned. Emily greeted me with her usual brittle smile. "You look well," she said, eyes scanning my outfit like she was checking for holes. Chris nodded at me. "Mom." Dinner was quiet. The room smelled like lemon chicken and fresh rosemary. But there was tension under the silverware. At one point Emily raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said. Chris added, "And smart investments." They clinked their glasses and smiled. I smiled too. But not for them. I smiled because I already knew their plan was crumbling. I had made mine. A week after that dinner, I found the envelope that changed everything. It had been tucked into my mailbox, wedged between a gardening catalog and a grocery circular. No return address. No stamp. Just my name handwritten on the front. Inside was a copy of a loan pre-approval, addressed to Christopher Lockhart and Emily Lockhart, using my home address as collateral. I sat down right there on the porch steps, letter trembling in my hands. It listed the house value, the estimated equity, and a note about anticipated inheritance timeline in the margin. Inheritance. While I was still alive. I folded the paper carefully, went inside, and locked the door. Then I poured myself a glass of water and just sat at the kitchen table in silence. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about a few careless charges or the occasional overstep. This was a plan. A long, detailed, deceitful plan. Made behind my back. About my life. My home. My future. And they hadn't even thought to tell me. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed up rereading everything, the bank statements, the credit inquiries, and now this loan document. I opened the photo album I kept in my side table. There was a picture from Christopher's 8th birthday. Harold had just passed. We were at the park, just the two of us. Chris was holding a balloon shaped like a dinosaur. I was smiling even though my eyes looked tired. He had written me a card that day. "I love you forever, Mommy. I'll never let you be alone." I held that photo to my chest and sobbed, because somewhere along the way that little boy had disappeared. And in his place was someone who saw me as a transaction. The next day I went to the bank in person. Rachel, the sweet teller who always wore pink lipstick, greeted me. I handed her the document. Her face fell. "Mrs. Lockhart. I didn't think they'd go this far." So she knew. I looked at her square in the eye. "Tell me the truth, honey. Have they been asking about loans using my property?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I'm not supposed to discuss customer details, but, yes. A few weeks ago, Chris came in with a notary. He said you'd agreed to something, but you weren't able to come due to early-stage memory issues." I didn't believe it. That's why I flagged the file. My mouth went dry. They were trying to build a case to claim I was unfit. To take control. I thanked her, asked her to print every statement from the past 2 years, and left with a stack of papers under my arm thick as a family Bible. At home I laid it all out on the floor. Every charge, every transfer, every withdrawal. I found receipts for spa treatments, hotel reservations, and a payment to a boutique fertility clinic. They were building a life I wasn't part of, using the life I had built for them. The worst part? There was a folder on my computer desktop labeled medical. I hadn't opened it in over a year. It was mostly scans and insurance from my last knee procedure. but buried inside was a letter, dated 6 months ago, a typed draft from Emily. To whom it may concern. We are writing to request a formal evaluation of Marjorie Lockhart's mental capacity. We believe she may be suffering from early cognitive decline and would benefit from being placed under full guardianship, with financial responsibilities handled by her son, Christopher Lockhart. It wasn't signed, just a draft, but that told me everything. They had been planning this for months, crafting a paper trail, whispering in offices, laying the bricks for a legal ambush. That night I sat on my porch swing and thought about Harold. He always used to say, "Don't be afraid to plant your feet, Marjorie. You bend too long, the wind will think you belong to it." Well, the wind had blown long enough. I wasn't bending anymore. The next morning I met with Esther, the lawyer. I handed her the stack of papers, the printed email, the notary log, and even the photo of me and Chris from his 8th birthday. "Put it all in the file," I said. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded. We drafted a new will. We rewrote the power of attorney. We included a clause. If any named heir challenged the will or my mental capacity, the entire estate would be redirected to a women's shelter I used to volunteer for back in the day. Esther looked at me after we finished signing. "You know this might create a war," she said. "I'm not starting a war," I replied. "I'm ending one they thought I wouldn't notice." I left her office with copies of everything in a sealed folder. I stored one at home, gave another to Rachel at the bank to keep on file, and mailed one to my friend Louise with instructions just in case. It didn't feel like revenge. Felt like rescue. Rescuing myself. Rescuing the woman I used to be before guilt made me blind. Before trust became a weapon used against me. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just showed up on their doorstep, folder in hand. Chris answered the door, wearing a crisp white shirt and that fake, strained smile he'd started wearing lately. The one that tried to pass as warmth but never quite reached his eyes. "Mom," he said, surprised. "Didn't know you were coming by." "I figured I'd save you the text," I replied, holding up the folder. He stepped aside slowly. "Emily's at work." He stepped aside slowly. "Emily's at work." "That's fine," I said. "I came to talk to you." We sat in their pristine living room, spotless like it had never been lived in. He perched on the edge of the couch, checking his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. I set the folder on the glass coffee table and opened it. Bank statements, credit reports, the draft guardianship letter, the notary log, the loan application using my house, all lined up in neat little tabs. Chris stared at the papers without touching them. Then he looked at me. "You've been spying on me?" I let out a small laugh, sharp and dry. "Is that what you call it?" "I call it paying attention. Something I should have done sooner." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Look, this is a misunderstanding. You're blowing things out of proportion." "Then explain it to me, Chris," I said, voice steady. "Explain the fertility clinic charges, the spa weekends, the trip to Napa, all coming out of my account." He shifted. "We were going to pay it back." "No, you weren't." Silence. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw it. Not guilt, not shame, but annoyance. Like a child being caught with his hand in the cookie jar, and blaming the jar for being within reach. "You know what this is really about," he said. "You're scared. You're getting older. You're feeling left behind. That's what this is." My breath caught. "That's what Emily meant," he continued, voice rising. "You're clinging to the past like a security blanket. The house, the money, it's all temporary. We're building a future. You should be proud of us." Proud? Of being lied to? Drained? Manipulated? I wanted to slap the word out of the air. Instead, I stood up, calm as a lake. "I was proud of you. Until you decided I was worth more as an asset than a mother." He looked stunned for a moment, just a flicker before the walls came back up. I didn't wait for a response. I picked up the folder and left, my hands shaking but my spine straight. Back at home, I sat on the porch swing, heart pounding. The confrontation had drained me, but not in the way I expected. I didn't feel broken. I felt done. Later that week, Louise dropped by with some cookies. As we sipped tea, she noticed the bags under my eyes. "You look tired," she said softly. I'm tired of giving everything and being treated like a burden. She squeezed my hand. That boy was lucky to have you. I just wish he remembered that. The following day, something unexpected happened. My neighbor Jonah, a retired veteran with a gruff voice and kind eyes, stopped by to return a baking dish. He hesitated at the door, then said, "Don't mean to pry, but everything all right?" I opened my mouth to lie, but something stopped me, so I told him the truth. Not every detail, but enough. He nodded slowly. That's hard. Real hard. But you're not the only one. My sister's daughter did something similar with her accounts. We talked for over an hour, and when he left he said, "You're not crazy. And you're not alone." That stuck with me. You're not alone. I started noticing things differently after that. The mailman lingered a bit longer to say hello. The lady from the church choir dropped off muffins with a note. "Thinking of you." People noticed the shift. They didn't say much, but they saw something was wrong. And that gave me strength. I began writing again, something I hadn't done in years. Notebooks filled with memories, stories, regrets. And through the ink I started to find myself again. One morning while flipping through an old album, I found a photo of me and Harold on the porch, young, laughing, coffee mugs in hand. I could almost hear his voice in my head. "Don't let them take your fire, Marjorie." I hadn't realized how dim I'd gotten. But the flame was back now. Quiet. Focused. Ready. I had plans to make. Real ones. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and paper, the kind of place where people go to end things. Esther greeted me with a firm handshake and those sharp, no-nonsense eyes I'd come to admire. She didn't ask how I was. She knew. We sat at the long walnut table as she laid out the draft of the new will. "Everything's as we discussed," she said, sliding the papers toward me. "But you can change anything right up until you sign." I looked at the top page, my name in bold type. "Last Will and Testament of Marjorie Ellen Lockhart." It felt final, but also strangely like a beginning. I had spent my entire adult life giving. Not just money, pieces of myself. My time. My peace. My sleep. My dreams. Everything was wrapped around the people I loved. And that love had made me blind. But this was clarity. Ink on paper. Boundaries that no one could manipulate. Esther read through the details aloud. "The house, your accounts, and remaining savings will be placed in a trust, to be converted into a grant for women over 50 experiencing financial abuse by family members. The organization you selected, Heart and Hearth, will administer the funds." I nodded. "And this clause," she added, tapping a line near the bottom, "states that any attempt to contest the will by an heir will result in a full forfeiture. The estate would then be donated to Heart and Hearth in its entirety." I looked at that sentence for a long while. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. For me. For women like me. I signed the page, my hand trembling just slightly. Not from fear, from release. Esther gave me a warm smile. "That was brave." "No," I said, setting the pen down. "Staying silent would have been easier. This is just necessary." We made copies. One stayed with her. Another I kept in a locked drawer at home. A third went to Louise. I even gave one to Jonah next door in a sealed envelope with a note. "Only open if something happens to me." He didn't ask questions. Just nodded, eyes serious. That week, I also visited the bank one last time to solidify the financial changes. Rachel helped me move my remaining funds into a new account under a trust's name. Chris's name was removed from everything. I expected it to hurt more. That final severing of what once felt sacred. But all I felt was peace. Still, the emotions crept in when I got home. I stood in my living room looking around at the space I'd built. Every picture, every stitch in the curtains, every floorboard Harold had sanded with his bare hands. This house wasn't just shelter. It was history, memory, life, and they had tried to take it like it was a number on a page. I poured a glass of wine, cheap, sweet, the kind Harold used to tease me for, and walked room to room whispering little thank yous. "To the walls that held me," I murmured. "To the floor that caught me when I broke. To the windows that watched me grow old." And finally, standing in the doorway to the guest room, once Chris's nursery, I said, "To the boy I raised, I hope some part of you is still in there. But this house, this life, it no longer belongs to you. I slept better that night than I had in months. In the days that followed, I went about my life with a quiet determination. I cleared out the junk drawer. I donated coats I hadn't worn in years. I started leaving the porch light on again. Not for someone to come home, but for me because I was still here. I stopped answering Chris's texts. He noticed. First they were polite. Hey, just checking in. All good. Then more pointed. You didn't cover the utility bill this month. Everything all right. Then sharp. What's going on, Mom? And finally one evening a voicemail I listened to 3 times. I don't know what you're doing, but this isn't you. You're being paranoid and frankly kind of cruel. Emily and I have been nothing but supportive. If you're making decisions behind our backs, it's going to get messy. I deleted it. Cruel. They always turn it around in the end, don't they? When the giving stops, they call you selfish. When the silence begins, they call you cold. But I wasn't cold. I was healing. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing I wasn't the mother he needed anymore. I was just a wallet that could talk. Well, not anymore. I'd written the will. Sealed the door. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to open it. It came in the form of a letter. Cream envelope, embossed edges, my name printed in a typeface far too formal for a family matter. Inside was a petition. A legal petition for guardianship. Filed by Christopher Lockhart. Claiming, in no uncertain terms, that I was suffering from cognitive decline, and that I was no longer capable of managing personal or financial matters independently. It felt like a punch to the chest. I sat on the edge of my bed, letter trembling in my hands. My ears were ringing. My mouth had gone dry. It was real. All of it. The conversations behind closed doors, the forged loan attempts, the draft letters, they were no longer drafts. No longer whispers. They had officially filed to take everything. The worst part? They hadn't even called me first. Not a warning. Not a conversation. Just paperwork. Cold, cruel paperwork. I read it 3 times, each word slicing deeper than the last. The section that stung most was where Chris had listed specific instances of forgetfulness, disorganization, and emotional instability. One of the examples: Mother missed a family dinner and became agitated when asked about it. Another: has been making erratic financial decisions, such as refusing to assist with shared household expenses. Shared? There was nothing shared. They took. I endured. I folded the letter carefully, as if disrespecting even that paper would somehow make me just like them. I stood up, walked over to the safe in the back of my closet, and pulled out the file I'd been keeping. The truth file. Every receipt. Every bank statement. Every printout of those shady charges. The notarized removal of Chris from my accounts. The new will. The trust papers. All neatly organized. Already. Harold would have been proud of me. I laid it all out on the kitchen table, took a deep breath and called Esther. When I told her what had arrived, there was a long pause. Then she said, "This is exactly why we prepared." We spent the next hour reviewing everything. She reassured me that with the documents in hand, we could easily fight the guardianship claim. But something in me had changed. I wasn't interested in just fighting it quietly. I wanted the truth out in the open, where it belonged. Later that day I packed a small bag. The folder, a flash drive, a cardigan, and a letter to Louise just in case I didn't come back home right away. Then I changed into the soft blue dress Harold always said made me look strong, not stern. I called Rachel from the bank, asked her to print one more round of statements. She said she'd have them ready by morning. And then I made my final stop. My grandson Jacob's birthday invitation was still sitting on my fridge. He was turning 13. They were hosting a backyard barbecue this Saturday. I hadn't planned to go. I hadn't been invited. But now I had to go. The morning of the party I took my time. I brushed my hair. I wore a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. And I walked out of that house not as a victim, but as a woman who finally understood what she was worth. When I pulled up to their house, the backyard was already buzzing. Kids playing, adults laughing, music floating in the air like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. I stepped into the yard and saw Chris by the grill. His smile faltered when he saw me. Emily turned pale. I didn't waste time. I walked straight to the patio table, opened my folder, and spread out the documents for anyone nearby to see. Then I raised my voice, just enough to rise above the chatter. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I began. But since I wasn't given a chance to speak before papers were filed against me, I figured I'd take a moment now. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. I held up the guardianship petition. My son filed a legal request to take control of my finances and my home. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. Gasps. Whispers. Someone dropped a drink. I flipped to the next page, a bank statement. Here is proof of unauthorized spending from my account. Luxury items, vacations, medical procedures I didn't approve. I passed around copies. Some people took them. Others just stared. I continued, voice calm but unwavering. I may be old, but I am not incompetent. I am not confused. And I am not going to be erased from my own life. Chris started to speak, stepping forward. "Mom, this isn't the place." I turned to him, meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks. "You made it the place when you turned my trust into a strategy. When you took what wasn't yours and called it love." Emily grabbed his arm. "We should go inside." "No," I said. "You should stay and listen. Because this family deserves to know the truth." I turned to Jacob, who stood frozen by the swing set, holding a paper plate of cake. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said gently. "I'm sorry this had to happen today. But someday I hope you'll understand why I spoke up." Then I gathered my papers, nodded to the stunned crowd, and walked away. My legs shook the entire drive home. My hands gripped the steering wheel like it was the last solid thing I owned. But I didn't cry. I felt lighter. Like something heavy had been burned off in that backyard. Shame, fear, illusion. And all that remained was truth. The silence that followed the party was louder than any shouting match. Not a single call. No apology. No explanation. Chris and Emily disappeared from my life as quickly as they had stormed through it, like a bad storm that leaves the roof rattled but still standing. But others had heard me that day. And they didn't forget. The phone started ringing 2 days after the party. First it was Bethany, Chris's cousin from Emily's side. "I just wanted to say good for you," she whispered, as if someone might be listening. "We always wondered where the money was coming from." Then it was Pastor Joe from church. "Marjorie, I had no idea. You should have said something sooner. We'll be here for you however we can." The women from my book club dropped off casseroles. Jonah mowed my lawn without asking. Even the mailman lingered longer than usual, offering a quiet thumbs up after setting a manila envelope on my porch. Word had spread. Not in a gossiping way, but in a quiet, respectful hum. People weren't talking about a senile old woman airing dirty laundry. They were talking about a mother who'd stood up for herself. But I wasn't naive. I knew it wasn't over. Sure enough, 3 days after the party, a letter arrived from Chris's lawyer, a firm I recognized from their embossed envelope alone. Inside was a notice. They were withdrawing the guardianship petition. No apology. No explanation. Just a legal retreat. Esther smiled when I brought it to her. "They know they can't touch you now," she said. That party? That was the trial they weren't ready for. But part of me still needed to look them in the eye one last time. So when Jacob showed up on my doorstep the following Saturday, holding a small box of cookies and a folded note, my heart nearly stopped. "Dad doesn't know I'm here," he said softly. I wanted to see you." He was 13 now, taller than I remembered, voice just beginning to dip into that awkward preteen stage. But his eyes? Still that same soft round shape Chris used to have. We sat on the porch swing. He handed me the note. It was in Chris's handwriting. "Mom, I don't know what happened to us. I really don't. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But Emily was right. You've always controlled everything. And I guess I got tired of asking for permission to live my life. I'm sorry it got ugly. I'm sorry you felt used. I guess we both wanted different things." I folded the note without finishing it. It was full of excuses. Half apologies tangled in self-pity. Jacob watched me carefully. He said you'd overreacted. But when I asked questions he wouldn't answer. So, I looked some stuff up on my own. About guardianship. About inheritance. My heart ached. "You shouldn't have to worry about things like that," I said. "I know," he replied. But I wanted to know the truth. I looked at this boy, my grandson, and wondered what would become of him. Would he grow up and forget his heart like his father? Or would he carry this moment, this clarity, into manhood? He took a cookie, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a sketchbook. I drew something. For you. It was our porch swing, with a tiny bluebird perched on the edge. Above it, in neat block letters, "You don't have to be loud to be strong." I choked up. That's beautiful, Jacob. He shrugged. You're still my grandma, no matter what they say. After he left, I stared at the sketch for a long time. That visit, that one quiet conversation, meant more than any apology Chris could have given me. It reminded me that not all things are broken beyond repair. That even in the ashes of betrayal, something pure can rise. I hung the drawing on my kitchen wall. Later that week, I went to church for the first time since the confrontation. Heads turned as I entered. Some nodded respectfully. Others smiled gently. After service, Sister Helen came up and wrapped me in the warmest hug. You were brave, she whispered. I was tired, I replied. Same thing, she smiled. She invited me to join a new support group the church was starting, for older women who'd experienced betrayal by family. I said yes before she finished the sentence, because I wasn't hiding anymore. And I wasn't ashamed. Chris hasn't reached out since. Emily neither. But that's all right. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some truths are better spoken once, firmly, with dignity, and then left to echo where they need to. I still sit on the porch swing most evenings. I sip my tea, hum to myself, and watch the bluebirds flutter near the feeder. Life feels quieter now, but not empty. Do you think the mother made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. After the dust settled, it wasn't rage that filled the air. It was silence. Not an absence, really. More like a hum. A quiet space where noise used to live. Where stress used to cling to the corners of every room. No more waiting for the phone to buzz with another demand. No more stomach flips every time a letter arrived. No more wondering what I'd said or done to make my own child turn on me like that. Just stillness. And for the first time in years it felt good. I spent the next few mornings tidying up my home. Not scrubbing, not cleaning like I was expecting guests. Just settling back into it. I opened windows. Let in the light. I even rearranged the living room furniture. Harold would have chuckled at how I moved the couch 3 times before deciding it looked best exactly where it started. Funny how we hold on to old routines even after we've outgrown them. The neighbors waved more now. I think they didn't know what to say, but they wanted to say something. One woman from 3 doors down, Claire I think her name is, brought over muffins and left them at the door with a note that said, "You're not alone. Proud of you." I cried when I read it. Not because I felt sad, but because I finally felt seen. The whole town knew, or so it seemed. But I didn't mind. Let them talk. Let them wonder how a son could try to steal from the mother who carried him through fire and storm. Maybe someone else going through something similar would find their voice because of it. The whispers didn't hurt anymore. The silence didn't either. Felt like healing. I started going for walks again down the old trail Harold and I used to take when we were younger, when our knees still worked like they were supposed to. The trees had grown taller. The creek was thinner. But the path was still there. Like me. One morning I sat on the bench near the trail's end and looked up at the sky. It was that pale, early morning blue, the kind that looks washed in silver. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I hope I made the right choice, Harold." No wind answered me. No bird sang in response. But I felt something settle in my chest. A peace. That evening Jonah came by with a toolbox. Said the latch on my screen door looked like it was sticking. "I've been meaning to fix it," he muttered, though I never asked. I made us tea and we sat on the porch after he finished. He didn't ask about the drama. He didn't need to. After a long silence he said, "You know, I always thought you were the quiet kind. The kind who wouldn't raise her voice unless the house was on fire." I smiled. Turns out it was. He laughed, deep and warm. Then his face softened. "I'm glad you spoke up," he said. I nodded. "Me too. I just wish I hadn't waited so long." "Timing's funny like that," he replied. "Sometimes the silence teaches you things noise never could." That line stuck with me. The silence had taught me plenty. It taught me that love doesn't mean sacrifice without limits. It taught me that trust, once broken, doesn't always come back. And most of all, it taught me that protecting your peace doesn't make you cruel. It makes you wise. Later that week, I got a visit I hadn't expected. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, showed up at my door. I didn't recognize her at first, but then she introduced herself. Hi, I'm Dana. I work at the women's center you donated to, Heart and Hearth. She held out her hand. Her nails were bitten down, and she had that look in her eyes, part pride, part fear. The look of someone who'd been through something and wasn't sure if they were supposed to talk about it. We heard what you did, she said, and we just wanted to say thank you. A few of us are putting together care kits for new residents, and we wondered if we could include a note from you, like a message, for women going through what you went through. I was stunned. Truly. I nodded slowly, heart full. Of course. I'd be honored. She smiled and pulled a small notebook from her tote bag. Do you want to write it now? So I did. In shaky handwriting I wrote, You are not a burden. You are not broken. And the love you gave to people who didn't deserve it? That love still counts. It proves you have a heart worth protecting. So protect it. Starting now. She folded the note and held it close like it was gold. When she left, I realized something important. My story, my pain, wasn't just mine anymore. It was going to help someone else find their way back to themselves. That night, I sat on my porch swing, the bluebird sketch from Jacob framed above the table next to me, and I smiled. Because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't waiting for anything to happen. I was simply living. It started with a shoebox. I was cleaning out the hall closet. Not for any particular reason, just one of those impulses you get when life starts to settle again. When I found it wedged behind an old umbrella and Harold's bowling shoes. It was full of index cards, scraps of paper, newspaper clippings. Ideas. Old ones. Things I'd once dreamed of doing someday. A community reading nook for women. A skills swap program where retired folks taught younger people how to cook, budget, sew, or garden. Notes about a house I'd wanted to open to women starting over after abusive relationships. A place where dignity came before pity, and nobody had to feel like a statistic. I'd forgotten I even wrote those. I sat on the floor of the closet with the shoebox in my lap and cried. Not out of regret, but out of a strange, glowing feeling I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Something that wasn't about what had been taken from me, but what I still had to give. The next morning I called Dana, the young woman from Heart and Hearth. I told her about the shoebox, about the old ideas about my house. This big, beautiful, quiet house that felt too full of echoes and not enough footsteps. She came over the next day, notebook in hand, eyes bright with curiosity. I was hoping you'd say something like this, she said, grinning. Over tea and oatmeal cookies we went through everything. My spare bedroom, the unused sunroom, the old den that used to be Chris's nursery and could now be a reading lounge, the garden Harold built, which could become a quiet space for reflection, or even a vegetable plot for new guests. By the end of the afternoon we had sketches, names, even a few grant ideas. That night I called Louise. You remember those crazy plans I used to ramble about in book club? She laughed. The ones we said we'd start when we were too old to care what anyone thought? Yes. I'm starting them. There was a pause on the line. Then, you're serious? As a heart attack, I said, smiling into the dark. We began the next week. Dana brought over 2 volunteers from the Women's Center. A quiet girl named Tessa who used to be a house painter, and her friend Martina, who was handy with power tools. Together we cleared out closets, painted the guest room a soft sage green, and moved the dining table into the den to create space for meetings and meals. Jonah dropped off extra lumber from an old shed project. Rachel from the bank donated folding chairs. Sister Helen came by with a box of gently used teacups and a stack of daily devotionals. People were showing up. Not for gossip, not out of pity, but out of respect, out of belief. Every room I transformed, every drawer I emptied, felt like a layer peeling off my past. Not erasing it, never that, but making room for something better. There was dust. There were sore backs and nicked fingers. But there was laughter, too, deep, belly-warming laughter I hadn't heard in my home since Harold passed. One night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the half-finished sunroom, now filled with throw pillows and a rug I found on clearance. I opened a window, let in the night air, and listened. No TV. No phone. Just crickets. And peace. And then I realized this was healing. Not just for me. For everyone walking through that door. Women who'd been told they weren't enough. Wives discarded. Mothers forgotten. Friends overlooked. Just like me. But we weren't broken. We were just waiting for the right moment to begin again. And this was our moment. By the end of the month we had a name, Marjorie's House. I hadn't wanted it named after me at first. Felt too self-important. But Dana insisted. Because it started with your story, she said. And now it's going to help others write theirs. We held a soft launch. Not a big crowd, just a few local women friends, a reporter from the town paper. We served lemonade and cookies. Louise read a poem. I gave a little speech. Kept it simple. This house has seen joy and grief, laughter and betrayal. It's been filled with noise, and it's been painfully quiet. But now it's going to be something new. A place where no one is invisible. Where your story doesn't end in silence. Where healing gets a name and a door to walk through. They clapped. Some cried. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I had finally taken my pain and turned it into something whole. Chris hadn't shown up. I hadn't expected him to. But part of me still wondered if he knew. If he heard my name in the papers. If he saw the pictures online. If he cared. It didn't matter really. Because for once this story wasn't about him. It was about me. And the life I was reclaiming. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in bold, beautiful purpose. They didn't come all at once. They came like rain, slowly, gently, and then all at once. The women who arrived at Marjorie's house were not what the world would call broken. No, they were weathered. Wounded, maybe. But not broken. There was Nora, who had fled her sister's home after years of being treated like a housemaid. Sandra, soft-spoken and always clutching a small purse, who'd signed away her rights to a family farm she'd helped build. And Alina, barely 35, recovering from a divorce that left her bankrupt and shamed by her in-laws. Each story was different, but each one echoed mine. They were me, just in different mirrors, different timelines. The first night we gathered around the kitchen table, the same one where I used to serve Sunday pot roast to a boy who now pretended I didn't exist, there was a stillness that made me ache. Until Nora made a joke about the wallpaper looking like a grandmother's apron. And we all laughed. Loud, long, real laughter. That's when I knew, this wasn't just a project. This was family. Not blood family, but real family. The kind that doesn't ask what you can give. The kind that listens when you speak, even if your voice trembles. We created a rhythm. Morning coffee in the sunroom. Weekly budgeting classes in the old den. Alina taught yoga in the backyard with borrowed mats. Sandra cooked soup for anyone who looked sad. And it worked every time. Jonah came by often, fixing screens and leaky faucets. He never lingered too long, but he always left a little note taped to the fridge. One said, "Nailed the porch step." Nailed the meaning of home, too. I smiled for hours after reading that one. Even Louise, who'd sworn off anything more strenuous than knitting, started hosting storytelling circles on Fridays. Women came and shared things they hadn't spoken aloud in decades. "I used to dream of writing a book," one woman whispered once, eyes glistening. "But my ex said no one would want to read about an old woman's life." We all leaned in and I said, "That's exactly the kind of story the world needs." One afternoon I stood in the kitchen, watching as Nora taught Sandra how to make dumplings from scratch. The sun poured through the window. Someone was humming in the hallway. The house felt warm, alive. It reminded me of the way it used to feel when Chris was small, chasing toy trains across the floor, shouting for me to, "Look, Mommy." But this time the warmth wasn't borrowed from the past. It was happening now. Then came the day I saw the familiar face at the gate. Jacob. He looked taller again. Thinner. Like he'd grown faster since that last visit. He wasn't carrying cookies this time. Just a backpack slung over one shoulder and a sheepish smile. "I asked Dad if I could visit," he said. He didn't answer. So, I just came. I opened the gate wide. "You're always welcome here." He looked around, eyes wide at the colorful porch planters, the painted chairs, the carved wooden sign that read Marjorie's house. "Healing lives, one room at a time." "This place is cool," he said. I showed him around, the quiet room, the reading nook, the garden with Alina's herbs growing wild in mismatched pots. He paused at the photo wall we were building in the hallway, filled with smiling faces of women who'd come and gone. Do you want to add one of you? I asked gently. He hesitated. Can I take one with you? That night we sat on the porch swing just like we had months earlier. He told me about school. About how his dad barely spoke about anything real anymore. How Emily didn't let him talk about me. He says you turned on us, Jacob said. I swallowed hard. What do you think? I asked. He didn't answer for a while. Then, I think he forgot how to be your son. But I didn't forget how to be your grandson. Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I reached out and held his hand. You don't have to choose sides, Jacob. You just have to choose truth. He nodded. Before he left, he hung his photo on the wall, between Alina's beaming smile and a group shot of us all holding sparklers from our founding night celebration. Later, I stood there alone looking at those faces. We weren't blood, but we were real. We knew how to listen, how to hold space, how to mend with kindness instead of guilt. The kind of family I had longed for and had now built. It didn't erase the pain. It didn't undo the betrayal. But it reminded me that family isn't who you raise. It's who raises you back up when you've been knocked down. It happened quietly without warning. A knock at the door. Not rushed. Not angry. Just there. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters after breakfast. Nora and Sandra had gone grocery shopping. The house was quiet. Peaceful. When I opened the door, the past stood in front of me. Chris. His eyes looked tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from the kind of weariness that sits deep in a person's bones. He wasn't dressed like he used to be. No pressed collar, no expensive watch. Just a gray hoodie and jeans. He looked older. Smaller somehow. We stood there for a long moment. Can I come in? He asked, voice low. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like he was stepping into someone else's home. In many ways he was. I led him to the same couch we'd sat on years ago when Harold passed, when I held him through his sobs. This time we sat farther apart. He looked around, noticing the changes, the new rug, the soft curtains, the framed photo of Jacob on the mantel. This place looks different, he said. It is different, I replied. Silence settled between us like dust on an old shelf. Finally, he sighed. I heard about what you're doing here. Jacob told me a little. The paper, too. I nodded, waiting. He stared at his hands. I came to say, I'm sorry. I said nothing. He continued, struggling. I don't know when it happened, when I started seeing you as a resource instead of a person. Emily was always pushing, always planning. I wanted to give her the life she expected. And I was the shortcut, I said softly. He flinched but nodded. I told myself it was temporary. That I'd pay you back. That you didn't need it as much as we did. But the truth is, he paused, his voice catching. I think I just stopped seeing you as my mother. And started seeing you as an obstacle. That hurt more than anything else he could have said. I looked out the window, where the wind was moving the garden herbs in soft waves. When you filed for guardianship, I said slowly, you didn't just take my rights. You tried to take my dignity. I know, he whispered. I was wrong. So wrong. And I'm not here to make excuses. I guess I'm hoping there's still a bridge to rebuild. Even if it's a small one. I studied him. The lines on his face. The twitch in his jaw. The grief he finally let show. I searched for the little boy who once left dandelions on my pillow. He was still in there. Buried. But this wasn't about finding him anymore. This was about me. I appreciate the apology, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean return. You understand that, don't you? He looked up, eyes full of something raw. I think so. I built this house, I continued. Not with bricks, with years. With sacrifice. With love. And then I rebuilt it again with pain, with clarity, with women who remember how to be kind. I'm not asking to come back, he said quickly. I just wanted to say it. Before too much time passed. I stood, walked to the shelf and retrieved a photo, one of him and me, back when he was 5 at the county fair. He was smiling so wide, cotton candy on his cheek. I handed it to him. You can keep this, I said. To remember who you used to be. Maybe one day, you'll become someone he'd be proud of. He nodded, silent. As he walked to the door, he paused. Jacob. He really loves this place. I know, I said. And he's always welcome. He lingered for one more second, then left without another word. I stood there for a long while listening to the silence return. Not heavy, not tense. Just quiet. And in that quiet I felt something shift. Not closure. Not yet. Maybe never. But understanding. That was enough. Later that afternoon, I sat in the sunroom as the women bustled around the house, prepping for our weekend dinner. Nora made her famous lentil stew. Sandra was chopping vegetables like a chef. Alina set the table with mismatched plates and candles. The house was full again, not of history but of now. Jacob arrived just before sunset, hugging me without a word, and placing a small bouquet of flowers on the table. Wildflowers. Dandelions among them. I thought they'd make you smile, he said. They did. More than he'll ever know. Would you have forgiven him? Or did she do the right thing? Let us know in the comments. The morning of the grand opening felt like a homecoming. Not the kind with streamers or a marching band, but one of quiet triumph, of hard-earned peace. I stood in front of the house in a soft blue dress, the same one I wore to confront Chris all those months ago. But this time there was no folder in my hand, no tension in my shoulders, just gratitude. The new sign gleamed in the sunlight. Marjorie's house. A place to begin again. It was carved from cedar wood, painted by one of the women who had stayed here for a time before getting her own apartment. She left it as a gift, wrapped in brown paper with a note. Thank you for giving me back my dignity. People began to arrive. Neighbors, church members, women from the center, volunteers, a few reporters. Even the mayor showed up and shook my hand with both of his. You've built something special here, he said. Something this town needed more than it realized. I nodded, trying to keep the tears from starting too soon. We had set up chairs on the lawn, tea in mismatched cups, cookies on hand-painted platters, and fresh flowers everywhere, donated by the local florist, who had lost her own mother to elder neglect. Louise stood beside me, reading the program she had helped design. Think they'll cry during your speech? I might cry during my speech, I said, laughing gently. And I did. But not from sadness. When I stepped to the front, looking out at all those faces, some familiar, some new, my voice trembled only a little. Thank you, I began, for being here, for believing that healing can start even in the later chapters of life. I paused, feeling the weight of all that had come before. My voice steadied. This house was once a place of silence, a place where I shrank myself to fit inside other people's expectations. But not anymore. Now it's a place of stories, of laughter, of second chances. I glanced toward the garden, where Jacob was helping set up the lemonade table. He looked up and smiled. I used to think I had lost my family, I continued. But I was wrong. Family is not always who shares your blood. Sometimes it's who shows up when the world forgets you, who sits with you in your pain, who reminds you that you still matter. The crowd was quiet, still, listening. I may be old. I may have made mistakes. But I am not done. And neither are any of the women who passed through this door. A pause. This house lives again. And so do we. Applause broke out, warm and full. Louise clapped the hardest. Afterward, people toured the rooms, the library nook filled with donated books, the reflection space with soft chairs and hand-sewn quilts, the photo wall in the hallway now lined with nearly 24 smiling faces. Women who had stayed here, found their strength here, left their pain behind here. Each photo had a single word beneath it: hope, courage, dignity. Enough. I added my own photo that afternoon, right beside the front door. My word? Home. Later, as twilight settled, we gathered on the porch with music playing softly from an old radio. Some danced barefoot on the grass. Others just swayed, teacups in hand, humming along. Jacob sat beside me again, watching the lights flicker in the windows. You know, he said, I think Grandpa would have loved this. I smiled. He would have built the bookshelf himself. Maybe I'll build the next one, he said quietly. My heart swelled. That night, long after everyone had gone home and the house had gone still, I walked through each room. I touched the door frames, smoothed out pillows, straightened the picture frames. I whispered thank yous To the women who trusted me, to the neighbors who stood beside me, to the version of myself who didn't give up when it would have been so easy to. I ended up in the garden, where the wind moved gently through the lavender and thyme. Looking up at the stars, I thought of Harold. I did it, love, I whispered. I kept the house. But more than that, I filled it with something worth keeping. And I swear, just for a moment, I felt him there. Not in a ghostly sense, but in the rustle of the leaves, in the strength of my back, in the certainty of my breath. I wasn't the same woman who started this journey. I was stronger. And I wasn't alone. Marjorie's house was no longer just my home. It belonged to every woman who had ever been told she was too much or not enough. To every mother forgotten. Every grandmother dismissed. Every widow who sat alone and wondered if her story still mattered. It did. We did. And now we had a place to prove it. Let me know if you'd like a title image description, a story summary, or if you'd like to begin outlining the next story.